My name is Autumn Wilson, and I'm 27 years old. 4 years ago, my own mother abandoned me in my wheelchair at the edge of a cliff, leaving me to die. What she didn't count on was my will to survive. The accident had taken my legs, but not my spirit. No one believed my story until the evidence became undeniable. Before I tell you how I went from being abandoned on a cliff edge to standing face to face with my mother years later, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more incredible survival stories like mine. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my life revolved around gymnastics. From the moment I took my first tumbling class at age 5, my mother Stephanie saw potential in me that she was determined to develop. While other kids had playdates and birthday parties, I had practice sessions and competitions. My childhood photo albums weren't filled with family vacations or school events. They documented my progression from local competitions to regional championships. "Higher, Autumn. Your extension needs to be perfect," my mother would call from the sidelines during practice. She never missed a session, scrutinizing every movement, every position. The other parents would come and go, but Stephanie was a constant presence, clipboard in hand, timing my routines down to the second. By 12, I was training 30 hours a week. When I complained of exhaustion or wanted to attend a friend's sleepover, my mother had a standard response: champions make sacrifices. Do you want to be ordinary or extraordinary? The question wasn't really a question at all. My father, Daniel, had left when I was 8. I remember their arguments often centered around my gymnastics schedule and the mounting expenses. "She's a child, Steph, not your project," he'd say. After he left, it was just me and my mother, our lives even more intensely focused on my gymnastics career. The strategy worked, though. By 16, I was competing at level 10, the highest level in the USA Gymnastics Junior Olympics program. College scouts attended my meets, and my mother meticulously tracked every conversation, every potential scholarship offer. "UCLA is showing serious interest," she told me after one competition, barely containing her excitement. "Their program is top tier. We need to push even harder now." When the scholarship offer from UCLA finally came, my mother cried for the first time I could remember. "We did it, Autumn. Everything we sacrificed was worth it." Looking back, I noticed she said "we" a lot when talking about my accomplishments. Moving to Los Angeles at 18 was my first taste of independence. My mother wanted to relocate with me, but even she couldn't justify leaving her job as an accountant. Instead, she called daily, requiring detailed reports about my training, nutrition, and coach's feedback. During my sophomore year, everything changed when I met Tyler Jackson. He was studying sports medicine and worked part-time with the athletics department. Unlike the intense, competitive world I was used to, Tyler was laid back and found joy in simple things. He taught me to appreciate sunsets and random road trips, experiences I'd never prioritized. "You're more than just a gymnast," he told me one night as we sat on the beach. "You know that, right?" The question hit me harder than any fall from the balance beam ever had. When I brought Tyler home during spring break, my mother's disapproval was immediate and unrelenting. "He's a distraction," she said after he'd left the room. "I can already see your focus slipping." "I'm maintaining a 3.8 GPA and still competing, Mom," I argued. "Maintaining isn't advancing," she shot back. "You could be team captain next year if you weren't wasting time with him." The tension escalated over the next 2 years. When I decided to move in with Tyler after graduation, my mother stopped speaking to me for 2 months. She finally called on my birthday, but the conversation quickly deteriorated. "So you're throwing away everything we worked for to play house with a boy? What about your coaching opportunities? What about the Olympic training center contacts we made?" "Those are still possibilities, Mom. I'm just living my life too." "I didn't sacrifice everything for you to become mediocre," she said, her voice ice cold. Despite her opposition, I moved forward with my plans. Tyler and I found a small apartment near the training center where I'd accepted a position as an assistant gymnastics coach. The role wasn't as prestigious as the national opportunities my mother had mapped out, but it made me happy. For the first time, I was making decisions based on what I wanted. The last time I saw my mother before the accident was at a coffee shop near my apartment. I'd hoped for reconciliation, but she arrived armed with a folder full of career opportunities one was missing and statistics about how relationships at my age rarely lasted. You need to wake up, Autumn. This fantasy life you're building will collapse, and then what? Then I'll figure it out, Mom. That's what adults do. Her face hardened as she gathered her belongings. You'll regret choosing him over me. When this all falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. I watched her walk away, never imagining how prophetic her words would become, or how differently they would play out than either of us could have anticipated. Rain hammered against the windshield as Tyler and I drove home from dinner with friends. It was just past midnight on a Friday in November, 6 months after graduation. The coastal highway curved along the Pacific, usually offering breathtaking views, but that night visibility extended barely beyond our headlights. Maybe we should pull over until this lets up, I suggested, watching Tyler's knuckles whiten as he gripped the steering wheel. We're almost home, he reassured me. Just another 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes never came. Headlights suddenly appeared in our lane, aimed directly at us. A driver had attempted to pass on the curve, misjudging the distance in the downpour. Tyler swerved right to avoid collision, but our tires lost traction on the rain-slicked road. Time slowed as our car broke through the guardrail. I remember the weightless sensation as we became airborne, Tyler's hand reaching for mine, and his voice shouting my name. Then came the violent impact as we rolled down the embankment, metal twisting, glass shattering. My world exploded in pain, then darkness. I woke to rhythmic beeping and the antiseptic smell of hospital. A nurse noticed my open eyes and called for the doctor. Their expressions told me everything before they said a word. Tyler? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, took my hand. I'm so sorry, Autumn. He didn't survive the impact. The physical pain of my injuries paled against the tidal wave of grief. Tyler was gone. The future we'd planned evaporated in an instant. The medical details came later. T10 complete spinal cord injury. Paralysis from the waist down. Multiple surgeries. Uncertain prognosis. The words floated around me, meaningless against my loss. Will I walk again? I finally asked on the third day. It's a complete injury, the neurologist explained. The chances are very low, but rehabilitation can help you adapt and lead an independent life. Independent. The word seemed hollow when I couldn't even sit up without assistance. On my 5th day in the hospital, my mother appeared in the doorway. For a moment, she seemed like a stranger, smaller and older than I remembered from just months before. Oh, Autumn, she whispered, approaching tentatively. My poor girl. Despite our strained relationship, I broke down in her arms. She held me as I cried for Tyler, for my legs, for the life I'd lost. In that moment of vulnerability, I was grateful for her presence. I'm moving in to help you, she announced the following day. I've already given notice at work. You'll need full-time care when you're discharged. Too overwhelmed to argue, I nodded. The logistics of my new reality were terrifying. My apartment wasn't wheelchair accessible. My job required physical demonstrations I could no longer perform. My savings wouldn't cover the mounting medical bills. I'll take care of everything, my mother promised, stroking my hair like she had when I was small. You just focus on getting stronger. For the first few weeks after discharge, her care seemed genuine. She transformed my apartment, rearranging furniture for wheelchair access, installing grab bars in the bathroom, researching adaptive equipment. She attended every doctor's appointment, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. We'll get through this, became her mantra. We're fighters, you and I. But subtle shifts began as weeks turned into months. My mother's initially encouraging tone during physical therapy sessions gradually changed. Don't push yourself too hard, she'd caution when I wanted to try something challenging. The doctor said you need to accept your limitations. The doctor had said no such thing. When friends from the gym tried to visit, my mother often claimed I was too tired or medicated to see them. Autumn needs calm and routine right now, she'd tell them. Too much stimulation is detrimental to her recovery. Isolated and dependent, I felt my world shrinking to the confines of my apartment, with my mother as gatekeeper. Meanwhile, the financial strain grew crushing. Insurance covered only a portion of my medical expenses, and my coaching position had been permanently filled during my absence. "I've applied for disability benefits," my mother informed me one evening. "And I'm managing your insurance settlement from the accident." "What settlement?" I asked, realizing I'd signed papers in the hospital, but recalled few details. "The other driver was uninsured, but your policy had coverage for that." "It's not much, but it will help with expenses." She changed the subject before I could ask for specifics. As my physical condition stabilized, my emotional state deteriorated. Depression enveloped me like a heavy blanket. Tyler was gone. My career had evaporated. My body felt like a prison. And increasingly, my mother's care felt suffocating rather than supportive. "Maybe I should look into adaptive sports programs," I suggested one day, seeking purpose. "There's one at the community center that works with former athletes." My mother dismissed the idea immediately. "Those programs are for people further along in recovery. You're still too fragile, Autumn. Besides, who would take you there? I'm already stretched thin managing everything." That night, staring at the ceiling, I realized with chilling clarity, my mother didn't want me to recover. My dependence had given her exactly what she'd always wanted: complete control over my life. 6 months after the accident, my existence had become a carefully controlled routine orchestrated entirely by my mother. My once active life had contracted to the dimensions of our apartment, with occasional outings only when she deemed necessary. What had initially seemed like protective care had morphed into something more sinister. "Bailey called again," my mother mentioned casually one afternoon, referring to my former gymnastics coach and mentor. "I told her you're still not up for visitors." "Mom, I've told you I want to see Bailey," I protested. "She's been trying to connect for months." "And I've told you that you're not ready for the emotional strain," she countered, her voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Seeing people from your old life will only depress you more." The truth was exactly the opposite. Isolation was feeding my depression, not protecting me from it. Friends and colleagues had gradually stopped calling after repeated rejections. Even my physical therapist had been changed when I requested someone who made fewer demands, a request my mother had made without consulting me. One afternoon while my mother was grocery shopping, I managed to access her laptop. What I discovered sent waves of shock and betrayal through me. Bank statements showed regular transfers from my accounts to hers. The insurance settlement she'd mentioned, a substantial sum of nearly $300,000, had been steadily diminishing through withdrawals that didn't align with my medical expenses. When confronted, my mother didn't even deny it. "Of course I'm using the money," she said with unsettling calm. "Do you think caring for you is free? I gave up my job, my apartment, my entire life to be here. That settlement is payment for my sacrifices." "That money was meant for my long-term care and adaptive equipment," I argued, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to need it for years, possibly decades." Her laugh was cold. "And who's going to be providing that care? You think some stranger would do what I'm doing out of the goodness of their heart? This arrangement benefits both of us, Autumn. You get the care you need, and I get compensated for providing it." The gaslighting intensified after that confrontation. Items I knew I'd placed within reach would mysteriously move beyond my grasp. Appointments I wanted to attend would be rescheduled without my knowledge. My mother would forget to charge my phone, cutting me off from any outside communication. "Your memory has been affected by the trauma and medication," she would insist when I questioned these incidents. The doctor mentioned this might happen. I began to doubt my own perceptions, wondering if the accident had indeed affected my cognitive functions. That doubt was exactly what she wanted. In a moment of clarity during a rare solo physical therapy session, my mother had a dental appointment she couldn't reschedule. I confided in my therapist, Lisa. "Is memory loss common with my type of injury?" I asked hesitantly. "Not typically with spinal cord injuries," Lisa replied. "Why do you ask?" That simple question cracked open the door to reality. When I explained the memory issues my mother had attributed to my condition, Lisa's concerned expression confirmed my fears. "Autumn, That sounds more like gaslighting than medical symptoms, she said carefully. Would you like me to connect you with a counselor who specializes in trauma recovery? Someone separate from your mother's influence. Before I could answer, my mother appeared in the doorway, having arrived early to collect me. The slight narrowing of her eyes told me she'd overheard enough. Lisa was replaced by a new physical therapist the following week. Desperate for help, I managed to send a message to Bailey using a tablet my mother didn't know I had, hidden beneath my mattress when not in use. My former coach responded immediately, offering to help however she could. Something's very wrong, I wrote. She's taking my money, isolating me, and I'm afraid of what she might do if she thinks I'm trying to become independent. Bailey promised to come the next day when my mother typically went for groceries. But somehow, my mother discovered the plan. I never learned how. Perhaps she'd been monitoring my devices all along. That evening, she entered my room with a glass of water and my evening medication. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Time for your pain meds, sweetie. I didn't request any pain medication tonight, I said, suddenly wary. I'm not in pain. The doctor adjusted your regimen, she replied smoothly. You need to stay ahead of the pain, remember? I pretended to take the pills but slipped them under my tongue, spitting them out later when alone. That night, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. She's becoming difficult again, my mother was saying. I think we need to consider more permanent arrangements. Yes, I know it's drastic, but what choice do I have? The next morning, my tablet was gone from its hiding place. So was my phone. The landline had been disconnected for non-payment, according to my mother. Why are you doing this? I demanded. Doing what? Taking care of my ungrateful daughter who tried to go behind my back. Her mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Did you think I wouldn't find out about Bailey? About your little messages begging for help. Her boyfriend Mark appeared more frequently after that. A man I'd never met before the accident. He had a shifty demeanor and encouraged my mother's worst behaviors. She's quite the burden, isn't she? I overheard him say one night. All that money tied up in her care when you deserve some happiness too, Steph. My mother's response chilled me to the bone. Something will have to change soon. This situation isn't sustainable. I began to fear for my safety, sleeping fitfully and hiding a kitchen knife under my pillow. The woman who had once pushed me to be extraordinary was now the greatest threat to my existence. 3 weeks after discovering my communication with Bailey, my mother entered my room with an unusually bright smile. I think we need a change of scenery, she announced. Let's take a drive along the coast. The fresh air will do you good. Every instinct warned me to refuse, but what choice did I have? I couldn't call for help. I couldn't escape on my own. And a small, desperate part of me hoped that perhaps this gesture indicated a return to normalcy. That sounds nice, I replied cautiously. When were you thinking of going? Right now, she said, already moving to collect my jacket. Mark's lending us his car for the day. The weather's perfect. The weather was far from perfect, overcast and windy, typical for the Oregon coast in early spring. As she helped transfer me from the wheelchair to the passenger seat, I noticed a half-empty vodka bottle poorly hidden under the driver's seat. My mother had been drinking more heavily in recent months, often starting before noon. Should you be driving? I asked as she slid behind the wheel. She ignored the question, pulling away from the curb with a slight swerve. I thought we'd drive up to Cape Mears. The view from the cliffs is spectacular. My unease grew as we left Portland behind, heading west toward the coast. My mother maintained an unnerving silence, occasionally taking swigs from a water bottle that clearly didn't contain water. The radio remained off, the only sounds the humming of tires on pavement and the increasing roar of wind as we neared the ocean. Cape Mears was a relatively popular tourist destination, known for its lighthouse and scenic viewpoints. But my mother drove past the main attractions, following a narrow road that wound higher up the headland toward more isolated outlooks. Where exactly are we going? I asked, unable to mask the tension in my voice. Somewhere private, she replied. Somewhere we can talk without interruptions. She finally pulled into a small gravel turnout near the edge of the cliff. No other cars were present, not surprising given the weather and the off-season timing. The wind had intensified, carrying the first spatters of rain. Dark clouds massed on the horizon, promising a significant storm. My mother cut the engine and sat silently for several minutes, staring out at the churning ocean below. When she finally turned to me, her expression was unnervingly calm. "I've been managing your money very carefully," she began, her words slightly slurred. "Making sure it stretches as far as possible. But even the settlement won't last forever with your ongoing care needs." "I should be involved in those decisions," I said carefully. "It's my future we're talking about." She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Your future? What future, Autumn? You think you're going to miracle your way out of that chair? You think some knight in shining armor is going to take on the burden of caring for you?" "I'm not a burden," I protested, though years of her conditioning made the words sound hollow even to my own ears. "And I could make progress with the right therapy." The doctors said you'll never walk again," she interrupted. "They're just stringing you along to keep billing insurance." "I've been realistic about this situation, even if you haven't." She took another drink, longer this time. "I found the contact information for Bailey in your room. And the knife under your pillow. You don't trust me after everything I've sacrificed for you." "Mom, I'm scared," I admitted, trying to reach whatever maternal instinct might still exist in her. "Your behavior lately, the missing money." "I don't understand what's happening." "What's happening is I'm tired," she said flatly. "Tired of changing adult diapers and being woken up at night. Tired of having no life because my daughter made poor choices and ended up crippled. You chose Tyler over me, and look where that got you." The cruelty of bringing Tyler into this took my breath away. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice now frighteningly methodical. "I've taken what's left of your settlement. About $120,000. Not enough to care for you indefinitely, but enough for me to start over somewhere warm. Mark has connections in Arizona." Horror dawned as I processed her words. "You're planning to leave me? Just abandon me with nothing?" "Not exactly," she said, opening her door and walking around to my side of the car. The wind whipped her hair as she opened my door and began unfastening my seatbelt. "I'm going to free us both." With surprising strength, she pulled my wheelchair from the trunk and roughly transferred me into it. I tried to resist, but months of muscle atrophy had left my upper body weaker than before. She wheeled me toward the cliff edge, stopping about 6 feet from the precipice. "Mom, please," I begged, real terror flooding my system. "You don't want to do this. This isn't you." "This is exactly who I am now," she replied, stepping back from the wheelchair. "Who you made me become." She engaged the brakes on the chair but positioned it facing the cliff edge, on ground that sloped subtly toward the precipice. If the brakes failed or if I moved too suddenly, gravity would do the rest. "The rain's coming in," she observed dispassionately. "They say it'll be quite a storm. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Enough to blow a lightweight wheelchair right over the edge, I'd imagine." I couldn't believe this was happening. "People will know. They'll look for me. They'll investigate. They'll find a tragic accident," she countered. A depressed, recently disabled young woman who couldn't cope with her losses took a drive to a scenic overlook. A gust of wind, a tragic oversight with the wheelchair brakes. These things happen. She walked back to the car, retrieving her purse. "For what it's worth, I did love you, Autumn. But you should have died in that crash with him. It would have been kinder for both of us." With those final words, she got into the car. The engine started, and without a backward glance, my mother drove away, leaving me alone at the edge of the cliff as the storm approached. Panic engulfed me initially. I screamed until my throat was raw, but the wind carried my voice out to sea where no one could hear. Rain began falling harder, driven horizontally by the strengthening wind. Each gust nudged my chair incrementally closer to the edge. The realization that I might actually die here, alone, cold, and betrayed by the person who should have protected me most, triggered something primal. The competitive spirit that had once driven me to gymnastics championships reignited. If I was going to die, it wouldn't be without fighting for my life with everything I had. I assessed my situation with forced calm. The wheelchair was positioned about 6 feet from the cliff edge. The ground sloped subtly but definitely toward the precipice. The brakes were engaged but might not hold against strong wind gusts. I had no phone, no way to signal for help. Night would fall in approximately 4 hours, and the storm was worsening. Using techniques from my gymnastics days, I began working to shift my weight and the chair away from the edge, inch by excruciating inch. The wheelchair brakes scraped against the gravel, resisting movement. Rain soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. But slowly, painfully, I managed to turn the chair parallel to the cliff edge rather than facing it. By nightfall, I had maneuvered about 10 feet from the precipice, safer but still dangerously exposed to the elements. Using my jacket and the limited mobility in my upper body, I created a makeshift shelter, hunching forward to minimize my exposure to the driving rain. Through that long, terrifying night, I focused on survival. I recited Tyler's favorite poems to stay awake. I remembered coaching techniques for maintaining body heat. I visualized Bailey finding me, refusing to let the image of my own mother's betrayal consume my thoughts. Morning brought no respite from the storm, but it did bring clarity. I wasn't ready to die. Not here, not like this. My mother had taken enough from me, she wouldn't take my future too. Hour 19 of my abandonment brought unexpected salvation. Through the rain, I spotted 2 figures on the hiking trail below. Using the last of my strength, I shouted and waved my arms frantically. By some miracle, they looked up. Mason and Lily Collins, a married couple celebrating their anniversary with an early morning hike despite the weather, became my lifeline. They couldn't reach me directly due to the terrain, but Lily stayed with me while Mason ran to get cell service and call for help. "Hold on," Lily called up to me, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Help is coming. Just hold on." The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 90 minutes later, lowering a rescue technician who secured me before lifting us both to safety. As we rose above the cliff where I'd expected to die, I felt something impossible: hope. The media dubbed it the Cliff Miracle. Local news vans crowded the hospital entrance, reporters desperate for details about the wheelchair-bound woman abandoned in a storm. Police issued an APB for Stephanie Wilson, whose disappearance coincided perfectly with my abandonment. Many didn't believe my story initially. The idea that a mother could leave her disabled daughter to die seemed too monstrous to be true. But evidence mounted quickly. The missing insurance money, witness accounts of my mother's erratic behavior in previous weeks, and most damning, surveillance footage from a gas station showing her and Mark counting cash before heading south on I-5 toward California. Detective Andrea Hayes was assigned to my case. Unlike others who approached with skepticism, she believed me from our first interview. "I've worked family crimes for 15 years, she told me. "Nothing about human cruelty surprises me anymore." Physical recovery came first. 19 hours of exposure had resulted in hypothermia, pneumonia, and pressure sores that required intensive treatment. The hospital placed a security guard outside my room, partly for my protection, partly because my story had attracted unwanted attention from media and curiosity seekers. Bailey arrived the day after my rescue, her face streaked with tears as she took in my condition. "I should have come sooner. I knew something was wrong." "You couldn't have known how wrong," I assured her. "No one could have predicted this." As my physical condition stabilized, the emotional aftermath hit with full force. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Panic attacks struck without warning. The dual traumas of Tyler's death and my mother's betrayal left psychological wounds deeper than any physical injury. 2 weeks after my rescue, Dr. Jordan Carter entered my life. As the hospital's specialist in spinal cord rehabilitation, he reviewed my case with particular interest. "Your previous therapy was concerning," he said during our first meeting, flipping through my medical records with a furrowed brow. The approach was unusually conservative, almost regressive. "Who supervised your treatment?" "My mother," I replied simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Well, Ms. Wilson, I'd like to propose an entirely different approach, if you're willing." Dr. Carter explained that certain incomplete spinal cord injuries sometimes showed unexpected improvement with aggressive physical therapy and experimental treatments. While he cautioned against false hope, he also refused to accept that my condition was permanent without exploring every option. Your gymnast background gives you exceptional body awareness and upper body strength, he noted. That's an advantage many patients don't have. I'd like to enroll you in a clinical trial using electrical stimulation combined with intensive physical therapy. For the first time since the accident, someone was offering possibility instead of limitation. When do we start? I asked. The next day, I met Lisa Martinez, the physical therapist assigned to my case. Unlike my previous therapists who had treated me with kid gloves, at my mother's insistence, I now realized Lisa pushed me to my limits and beyond. I don't care that you can't feel your legs, she said during our first grueling session. Your brain needs to remember they exist. We're going to remind it every single day until something changes. Progress came in microscopic increments. The first breakthrough happened 3 weeks into treatment, a tingling sensation in my right big toe during electrical stimulation. Dr. Carter cautioned it might be phantom sensation, but repeated tests confirmed actual nerve response. It's like waking up from a deep sleep, I tried to explain to Bailey during one of her regular visits. Not enough to move anything yet, but enough to know something's still there. While my body fought to recover, Detective Hayes continued building the case against my mother. Bank records showed Stephanie had emptied my accounts before fleeing. The insurance company confirmed she had falsified documents to gain control of my settlement. Even my apartment, which I'd believed was rented in my name, had been transferred to her through forged paperwork. She was planning this for months, Hayes explained during an update. The cliff wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the culmination of a calculated plan. The manhunt expanded when evidence suggested my mother and Mark had crossed into Canada. Their trail went cold in Vancouver, where they had apparently acquired new identification documents. 3 months after the cliff incident, Bailey offered me a lifeline, a room in her home, specially adapted for my needs. The insurance company is releasing funds directly to you now that the fraud has been documented, she explained. It won't replace everything that was stolen, but it's enough to cover medical expenses and adaptive equipment. Moving in with Bailey marked the beginning of true recovery. Her home became my sanctuary, a place free from fear and manipulation. As weeks turned into months, I slowly reclaimed pieces of myself that had been suppressed under my mother's control. The experimental treatment continued showing promising results. 6 months after beginning the program, I experienced my first voluntary muscle contraction below the injury site, a slight but unmistakable movement in my right quadriceps. This doesn't mean you'll walk again, Dr. Carter cautioned, though I could see excitement behind his professional reserve. But it does mean your injury may not be as complete as initially diagnosed. I'll take any progress, I replied, watching in wonder as my leg twitched slightly in response to my concentrated effort. Even if it's just this, it's more than I was told was possible. Hope is a powerful catalyst for healing. As sensation and minimal movement gradually returned to my legs, my psychological recovery accelerated as well. Working with trauma specialist Dr. Ramirez, I began processing not just the cliff betrayal, but the lifetime of manipulation that had preceded it. Your mother's behavior fits the pattern of narcissistic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies, Dr. Ramirez explained during one session. The control she exerted over your gymnastics career wasn't nurturing, it was about fulfilling her own needs through your achievements. Understanding the psychological dynamics didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me contextualize a lifetime of memories. The excessive control, the isolation from peers, the dismissal of my own desires. These weren't expressions of maternal devotion, but symptoms of a profound pathology. 1 year after the cliff incident, I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my recovery. Using the online platform Bailey helped me create, I shared my story publicly for the first time. The video, simply titled Surviving, detailed both the accident and my mother's betrayal. I expected skepticism. Instead, I received an outpouring of support. Other survivors of family trauma reached out. People with spinal cord injuries shared their own recovery journeys. The isolation that had been enforced by my mother dissolved as I connected with a community of people who understood various aspects of my experience. The video's unexpected virality also generated tips about my mother's whereabouts. Detective Hayes received reports of sightings across British Columbia, though none produced concrete leads. The case remained active, but as months passed without her capture, I made a conscious decision to focus on my future rather than my mother's fate. That future grew increasingly promising. The experimental treatment continued yielding results that defied initial prognosis. By the 18-month mark, I could stand briefly with support. By month 20, I took my first halting steps using parallel bars. "Your case is remarkable," Dr. Carter admitted during an evaluation. "The combination of the treatment protocol, your athletic background, and your sheer determination is creating results we rarely see with injuries of this severity." His clinical assessment couldn't capture the emotional magnitude of those first steps. Each wobbly movement represented not just physical progress, but a reclamation of everything my mother had tried to take from me: my independence, my future, my will to live. As my body grew stronger, so did my voice. What began as a single video evolved into regular updates on my recovery journey. I started a support group for survivors of family trauma, creating the community I had needed during my darkest days. When a local news station featured my story on the 2-year anniversary of the Cliff incident, I received an invitation to speak at a conference on trauma recovery. Standing at that podium, supported by forearm crutches, but standing nonetheless, I faced my largest audience yet. "Trauma doesn't define us," I told them. "How we rise from it does." In the audience, Dr. Carter watched with obvious pride. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into friendship, his belief in my recovery potential never wavering even when progress plateaued. The warmth in his eyes as I spoke hinted at feelings that mirrored my own growing attraction, a connection neither of us had yet acknowledged, but both increasingly recognized. As my public platform grew, so did the pressure on the investigation. New tips about my mother's whereabouts came in regularly, though most led nowhere. Then, nearly 3 years after her disappearance, a significant break, Mark's abandoned car was discovered near a hiking trail in northern British Columbia. An apparent suicide note on the dashboard claiming both he and Stephanie had walked into the wilderness to end their lives. "Do you think they're really dead?" I asked Detective Hayes when she delivered the news. "The note and abandoned vehicle follow the typical pattern for wilderness suicide," she replied. "But without bodies, we can't close the case. We'll keep looking, but honestly, resources will be diverted to active investigations now." The news left me with complicated emotions. If my mother was indeed dead, justice would remain incomplete. Yet the possibility of closure, of never having to fear her reappearance in my life, offered its own form of relief. That evening, sitting on Bailey's porch watching the sunset, I made a decision that felt like true freedom. "Whether she's alive or dead doesn't matter anymore," I told Bailey. "I'm not going to let her ghost control my life any more than she did." Bailey squeezed my hand. "That's the strongest thing I've ever heard you say." And it was true. In the depths of my darkest night on that cliff, I had found a strength I never knew existed, a strength that would carry me forward, regardless of whether my mother ever faced legal justice for what she'd done. The 2-year mark after the Cliff incident passed with a celebration I never could have imagined during those dark hours in the storm. Friends gathered at Bailey's home, not to commemorate my survival, but to celebrate my progress. Using forearm crutches, I walked across the living room unassisted, each step a victory against the prognosis that had once sentenced me to a lifetime of immobility. "To Autumn," Bailey toasted, raising her glass. "Who taught us all that impossible is just a word doctors use when they lack imagination." Dr. Carter, Jordan, as I'd come to call him outside our now weekly therapy sessions, laughed along with the others, but his eyes held something deeper when they met mine. The professional boundaries between us had gradually softened as my recovery progressed, though neither of us had yet acknowledged the growing connection. The experimental treatment program had expanded based partly on my case results. Electrical stimulation combined with intensive physical therapy was showing promising outcomes for other patients with similar injuries. I'd become something of an unofficial ambassador for the program, documenting my journey online and speaking at medical conferences about my experience. The clinical trial directors want you to consider a more formal role, Jordan mentioned as the party wound down. Patient advocate for the next phase of research. Your story is powerful, Autumn. It gives hope to people who've been told there is none. That proposal marked the beginning of a new chapter. Working alongside medical professionals who once treated me, I found purpose in translating complex protocols into accessible information for new patients. My background in coaching proved unexpectedly valuable. The skills used to guide young gymnasts transferred naturally to encouraging spinal cord injury patients through grueling therapy sessions. My living situation evolved as well. After 2 years with Bailey, I was ready for independence. The insurance settlement that remained after my mother's theft, combined with speaking fees and a part-time position with the research program, allowed me to rent a small accessible apartment near the rehabilitation center. You don't have to move out, Bailey insisted as I packed. This has been good for both of us. It has, I agreed, hugging my former coach who had become family in every way that mattered. But I need to know I can do this. Thus she didn't take that from me too. The move marked a psychological milestone as significant as my physical progress. Adapting to life alone presented challenges, but each obstacle overcome reinforced my independence. Simple achievements: cooking dinner without assistance, navigating public transportation with my mobility aids, managing my own medical appointments, built confidence that spilled into every aspect of my recovery. My social media following grew as I documented these seemingly mundane victories. What began as personal therapy evolved into a platform reaching thousands of people facing similar challenges. Comments poured in from others with spinal cord injuries, from trauma survivors, from people simply inspired by witnessing resilience in action. "You never sugarcoat the hard days," one follower commented. "That's what makes the good days believable." I made a conscious decision to be transparent about the ongoing struggles. The chronic pain that medication only partially addressed. The days when depression made getting out of bed seem impossible. The phantom sensation of Tyler beside me that sometimes woke me in the night. Healing wasn't linear, and pretending otherwise would dishonor both my journey and those following it. Through it all, Jordan's presence in my life remained constant. Our professional relationship had officially ended when I joined the research team as an advocate rather than a patient, removing the ethical barriers that had kept us in strictly defined roles. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked after a team meeting, the slight crack in his typically confident voice betraying nervousness. "Not at the hospital cafeteria, I mean. An actual restaurant. Just us." The question triggered unexpected panic. Since Tyler's death, I'd closed that part of myself off, unsure if I could ever risk that kind of loss again. Jordan must have seen the fear in my expression. "It's okay to say no," he added quickly. "Our friendship is valuable to me regardless." "It's not a no," I clarified. "It's more of a I'm not sure I remember how." His smile returned. "Fortunately, I'm certified in rehabilitation. We can figure it out together." That first date was awkward in the most wonderful way. We'd known each other for 2 years in a clinical setting, yet discovering each other outside those parameters felt like meeting for the first time. Jordan spoke about his childhood in Michigan, his decision to specialize in spinal cord rehabilitation after his brother's motorcycle accident, his terrible cooking skills, but excellent taste in music. I shared stories about my gymnastics days, carefully edited to focus on the joy of the sport rather than my mother's manipulation. "You never mentioned Tyler," Jordan observed as he walked me to my door. "I understand if it's too painful, but I want you to know it's okay to talk about him if you want to." The simple acknowledgement broke something open. Standing in my doorway, I told Jordan about Tyler's laugh, his terrible puns, his dream of opening a sports medicine clinic for underprivileged athletes. For the first time, I spoke about Tyler without the shadow of my mother's betrayal darkening the memories. "Thank you," I said as I finished, "for making space for him in this." "He's part of your story," Jordan replied simply. "Just as your injury is part of mine through different circumstances. We don't leave the people we've loved behind when we move forward." As our relationship deepened, so did my involvement with the spinal cord research community. 3 years after the cliff incident, I was invited to give a TEDx talk about neuroplasticity and recovery. Standing on that red circle, supported by a single cane rather than the forearm crutches I'd needed months earlier, I shared my journey from medical catastrophe to medical collaboration. The human spirit and the human nervous system have something remarkable in common, I told the audience. They both possess a capacity for adaptation that defies expectation. They both can forge new pathways when old ones are destroyed. And they both thrive when we refuse to accept artificial limitations placed upon them. The talk went viral, expanding my platform beyond the medical community to a broader audience. Interview requests flooded in. Publishers approached with book deals. The attention was overwhelming, but provided opportunities to advocate for research funding and insurance reform for spinal cord injuries. Amid this professional whirlwind, my personal life reached a crossroads. Jordan and I had been dating for nearly a year, our relationship growing stronger despite the complications of our intertwined professional worlds. One evening after a particularly grueling day of media appearances, he suggested a drive to the coast, a proposal that initially triggered painful flashbacks. "We don't have to," he backtracked, seeing my expression. "It was just a thought." "No," I decided. "I'd like that. I can't let fear of the ocean stay with me forever." The beach he chose was nothing like the clifftop where my mother had abandoned me. Accessible boardwalks led to viewing areas where we watched the sunset over gentle waves. As the horizon blazed with color, Jordan turned to me with uncharacteristic seriousness. "I had a whole speech planned," he admitted, "about how you've shown me what courage really means, how you've made me a better doctor and a better person. But standing here, all of that feels inadequate." When he knelt awkwardly in the sand beside my seated position, I felt my heart stutter. "Autumn Wilson, will you marry me?" he asked, presenting a ring that caught the last rays of sunset. Not because either of us needs the other, but because I can't imagine walking through life with anyone else beside me. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. Yes to all of it. That evening, back at my apartment, I received a call from Detective Hayes, the first in nearly 6 months. "We found Mark," she said without preamble, "alive in a small town outside Toronto. He was trying to use one of the fake IDs we've been tracking." My hand tightened around the phone. "And my mother?" "No sign of her. Mark claims they separated over a year ago after arguments about money. He says she headed west, possibly to Vancouver Island, but we're treating his information with skepticism given his previous deceptions." The news should have disrupted my happiness, but surprisingly, it didn't. Whether my mother was alive or dead, captured or free, no longer defined my existence. The power she had held over me, first through manipulation, then through fear, had dissolved through my own reclamation of self. "Thank you for letting me know," I told Hayes. "Please keep me updated, but I want you to know I'm okay either way." As our wedding approached, Jordan and I made a decision that surprised many but felt right to us. Rather than a traditional ceremony, we would marry at the rehabilitation center, surrounded by the patients and colleagues who had been integral to our journey together. The symbolism felt perfect, celebrating new beginnings in the place where so many fought to reclaim their lives. For years after being abandoned on that cliff, I walked down the aisle unassisted, my gait still imperfect but unmistakably mine. Jordan waited at the altar, his eyes reflecting amazement not at my walking. He had witnessed every step of that progress, but at the journey that had brought us to this moment. As we exchanged vows, I glanced at the gathered witnesses, Bailey in the front row, tears streaming unashamedly, Dr. Ramirez who had guided my psychological healing, patients I'd worked with who had become friends, even Detective Hayes, who had continued the search long after departmental resources had been redirected. "I promise to walk beside you," I told Jordan, the double meaning clear to everyone present, through whatever storms life brings our way. Later that evening, as celebration continued around us, Jordan asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your mother hadn't left you on that cliff?" I considered the question carefully. I'd probably still be in that wheelchair, believing I'd never improve. I'd still be under her control, my settlement money drained, my spirit broken. As terrible as that night was, it forced me to find strength I never knew I had. "You always had it," he corrected gently. "You just never needed it until then." Perhaps he was right. The cliff had not created my resilience. It had merely revealed it, like fire exposing the true nature of gold. With Jordan beside me, I looked toward our future, one that now included plans to start the adoption process. Having faced my own childhood trauma, I felt called to provide the nurturing home I'd never truly had. Our application highlighted our medical backgrounds and personal experience with overcoming adversity, strengths we believed would serve adoptive parenting well. The media continued following my story, but increasingly I directed attention toward the research foundation we had established to fund experimental treatments for spinal cord injuries. My platform became a megaphone for others whose voices had been silenced by disability or trauma, exactly the opposite of what my mother had intended when she left me to die alone. For years after that stormy night, I had transformed from victim to advocate, from patient to partner, from someone defined by what had been taken from me to someone characterized by what I had reclaimed. The wheelchair remained part of my life for longer distances, but it had become a tool rather than a prison. One mobility option among many rather than the sentence my mother had proclaimed it to be. My story had not ended on that cliff's edge. It had, in many ways, only just begun. For years and 3 months after the cliff incident, life had settled into a rhythm I never thought possible during those dark days. My walking continued improving through persistent therapy, though I still used a cane for stability and a wheelchair for longer distances. Jordan and I had transformed a small ranch house into an accessible home, complete with a therapy room where I both continued my own exercises and occasionally worked with private clients. My career had evolved in unexpected directions. What began as patient advocacy had expanded into motivational speaking, disability consulting for corporations, and co-authoring research papers on neuroplasticity and trauma recovery. The book I'd hesitated to write was now in its final editing stages, scheduled for publication in the spring. Most significantly, our adoption application had been approved. We were in the matching phase, attending workshops and preparing our home while waiting for the call that would change our family forever. "Do you think you're ready?" Dr. Ramirez asked during one of our now monthly sessions. "To be a mother, I mean." The question gave me pause. "I know what a mother shouldn't be," I replied carefully. "And I've been blessed with examples of what caregivers should be, Bailey, Jordan, even you. I think that's a good foundation." On a crisp autumn morning, the calm we'd built was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing manuscript edits when the doorbell rang. Jordan was at the hospital, so I made my way to the entrance, assuming it was a package delivery. Instead, I found a man I vaguely recognized but couldn't immediately place, older, weathered, with nervous eyes that darted past me to scan the interior of our home. "Autumn Wilson," he asked, though it clearly wasn't a question. "You probably don't remember me." "I'm Mark Daniels." The name hit like a physical blow. Mark, my mother's boyfriend who had encouraged her worst instincts, who had fled with her after the cliff incident, who had been arrested in Toronto 6 months earlier and was supposedly awaiting trial. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my hand instinctively tightening on my cane. "There's a restraining order." I know, he said hurriedly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I made bail last month and I've been thinking about everything. About what Stephanie did. What we did. You need to leave before I call the police," I replied, reaching for my phone. "Whatever confession you're looking for, I'm not the person to give it." "She's alive," he blurted. "Your mother. She's living on Vancouver Island under the name Claire Bennett. Has been for almost 3 years now." My finger hovered over the emergency call button. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the trial starts next month, and I'm looking at serious time," he admitted with surprising candor. "Accessory after the fact, fraud, identity theft, the list goes on. But Stephanie was the mastermind. She should be facing consequences too." I should have called the police immediately. Instead, I found myself asking, "Do you have proof?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket and extended it toward me. Address, photos, her work schedule at the diner. Everything Detective Hayes would need to find her. When I didn't reach for it, he placed it on the porch step. "Do what you want with it. My conscience is clear now." After he left, I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before finally opening it. Inside were indeed photos of my mother, older, hair dyed dark brown instead of her natural blonde, but unmistakably Stephanie Wilson. Working behind a counter, walking along a harbor, entering an apartment building. Living a normal life while I had fought through hell to reclaim mine. When Jordan returned home, he found me still at the kitchen table, the photos spread before me. "We need to call Hayes," he said after I explained Mark's visit. "I know," I agreed. "But part of me wonders if we should just let her go. She's already lost everything that mattered to her, control over me, access to my money, her identity. Maybe that's punishment enough." Jordan sat beside me, covering my hand with his. "What do you need for closure, Autumn? Not what you think is right or wrong, but what you need." The question crystallized something I hadn't fully acknowledged. I need to see her face when she realizes she failed. That I'm not just alive, but thriving. That everything she tried to take from me, I've reclaimed and more. The decision made, we contacted Detective Hayes, who moved with surprising speed once presented with Mark's evidence. Within 24 hours, she had verified my mother's location and identity. Within 48, she had coordinated with Canadian authorities for surveillance. The question that remained was whether to arrest her immediately or set up the confrontation I had requested. "It's irregular," Hayes admitted during a conference call. "But given the circumstances and the strength of our case, my lieutenant has approved a controlled meeting before we take her into custody. You'll wear a wire, we'll have plainclothes officers nearby, and you'll have a distress signal if you need immediate intervention." Jordan was concerned. "Are you sure about this, Autumn? Seeing her could trigger significant trauma responses." "I've been preparing for this possibility with Dr. Ramirez for years," I reminded him. "If she had died on that mountain like she wanted everyone to believe, I would have found peace anyway. But since she's alive, I want her to see exactly what she couldn't destroy." 2 weeks later, Jordan and I boarded a flight to Victoria, British Columbia. Detective Hayes had traveled ahead to coordinate with local authorities. The plan was simple. I would enter the diner where my mother worked during her regular shift. Jordan and plainclothes officers would be positioned nearby. I would confront her, get whatever closure I needed, and then step aside for the arrest. The Harbor Light Diner was a small establishment catering to locals and the occasional tourist, situated near the ferry terminal with views of the bay. According to surveillance, my mother, now Claire, had worked the morning shift for over 2 years, serving breakfast and lunch before departing around 3 each afternoon. Seated in our rental car across the street, I watched customers enter and exit for nearly an hour, gathering courage. "We can still walk away," Jordan reminded me. "Hayes can make the arrest without you ever seeing Stephanie." I shook my head. "I need this." Taking a deep breath, I added, "But I need you with me. Not waiting outside." "Are you sure?" We discussed. "I know. But I want her to see that I'm not alone. That I found the love and support she never gave me." Hayes adjusted the plan accordingly, and at precisely 1:45 p.m., Jordan and I entered the Harbor Light Diner. The lunch rush had subsided, leaving only a few occupied tables. And there, behind the counter refilling salt shakers, stood my mother. For years had changed her as they had changed me. Her once blonde hair was now a nondescript brown, styled simply rather than with the meticulous attention she'd once devoted to her appearance. Her face showed new lines, her posture less rigid than I remembered. She looked ordinary, smaller somehow, stripped of the power I had attributed to her for so long. We selected a booth with clear sight lines to the counter. A teenage waitress took our order, coffee for both of us, nothing more. I couldn't have swallowed food if I'd tried. "She hasn't noticed us yet," Jordan observed quietly. "Are you ready?" I nodded, rising slowly, my cane making a soft tap against the linoleum floor as I made my way to the counter. 4 steps. 5. 6. Close enough now that she would hear me if I spoke. Close enough to see the name tag pinned to her uniform, Claire. "Hello, Mom." 2 simple words that caused her world to collapse. She froze, salt shaker suspended midair, before slowly turning toward the voice she surely recognized, but couldn't possibly be hearing. The shock on her face when she saw me standing there, not in a wheelchair but on my own feet, was everything I had imagined and more. Color drained from her features. The salt shaker slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Autumn, she whispered, the name Claire Bennett falling away like the poor disguise it was. How are you? Alive? Standing? Here. I finished for her. All valid questions from someone who left her daughter to die on a cliff. Her eyes darted around the diner, noticing Jordan watching intently from our booth, perhaps sensing the plainclothes officers strategically positioned near the exits. The teenager behind the counter had stopped wiping glasses, attention caught by the palpable tension. We should talk somewhere private, my mother suggested, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. This isn't what you think. I can explain everything. There's nothing to explain, I replied, my voice steady. You stole my money. You isolated me from people who cared about me. You left me to die because I was inconvenient. Those are facts, not interpretations. She glanced toward the back door, calculating. Please, Autumn. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. The time for requests was 4 years ago, when I begged you not to leave me on that cliff, I said. But you walked away then. The difference is, I'm choosing to stand my ground now. Customers had begun to notice our exchange, conversations dying as attention shifted our way. My mother's expression hardened, the mask of Claire slipping further to reveal the Stephanie I remembered. You have no idea what I was going through, she hissed. The burden of caring for you, watching my entire life disappear into your needs. You were never going to get better. I was drowning. You were my mother, I replied simply. The person who should have protected me most. Instead, you saw my tragedy as your inconvenience. Her eyes narrowed. How did you find me? Was it Mark? That's spineless. Does it matter? What matters is that you failed. You left me to die, but here I stand. You took my money, but I built a new life. You tried to isolate me, but I found people who love me genuinely, not as an extension of themselves. Something shifted in her expression then. A flicker of the calculating woman I'd known replacing the cornered animal she'd momentarily become. You've done well for yourself, obviously. Perhaps we could start fresh. I am still your mother, after all. The audacity was so breathtaking I almost laughed. No, Stephanie. You forfeited that title on the cliff. I didn't come for reconciliation. I came so you would know you failed completely. Your prison hasn't been a cell these past years. It's been living as someone else, looking over your shoulder, knowing what you did. My prison was physical at first, but I escaped it. You built yours brick by brick, and you'll never truly escape it, even after you've served your time. Detective Hayes had approached silently during our exchange, positioning herself just behind my mother. At my subtle nod, she stepped forward. Stephanie Wilson, Hayes began formally, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, theft, and identity fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Hayes continued reciting rights, my mother's face transformed once more, shock giving way to fury, then collapsing into something like despair as handcuffs closed around her wrists. Our eyes met one final time as officers led her toward the door. I did love you once, she said, barely audible. Before everything got so twisted. I did love you. Whether the statement was manipulation or a moment of genuine reflection, I couldn't tell. Perhaps it didn't matter. I believe you, I replied. That makes what you did even worse. Outside the diner, Jordan wrapped his arm around my shoulders as we watched the police car pull away. Are you okay? The question had many possible answers, none of them simple. I will be, I said finally. It's strange. I thought seeing her would feel more significant. Like a final battle. But she seemed so small. So ordinary. Evil usually is, he observed. It's rarely as dramatic as we imagine. Back in our hotel room that evening, emotional exhaustion finally caught up with me. Jordan held me as I cried, not for the mother I'd lost, but for the one I'd never truly had. The woman who had stood before me today was a stranger, as she perhaps always had been beneath the masks she wore. I want to go home, I told Jordan as the tears subsided. Back to our life. Back to waiting for our adoption match. Back to all the things she tried to take from me. 3 days later, we returned to Seattle. Newspaper headlines announced the capture of the cliff abandoner, the sensational nickname media had assigned my mother years earlier. Interview requests flooded in, which my publicist politely declined. This chapter of my story belonged to me, not to public consumption. The legal process would continue without my daily attention. My mother faced extradition and eventual trial, but I had said everything I needed to say in that diner. My testimony was on record, my peace not dependent on judicial outcomes. 2 months after the confrontation, as winter softened into spring, the call we'd been waiting for finally came. A 3-year-old girl named Lily needed a home, and our profile had been selected by her caseworker as a potential match. Meeting her for the first time, I felt a circle closing. She was shy but curious, watching me with solemn eyes as I lowered myself to her level, setting my cane aside. "Hello, Lily," I said softly. "My name is Autumn. And this is Jordan." "You have a stick," she observed, pointing to my cane. "I do," I confirmed. "It helps me walk because my legs work differently than most people's." She considered this with the straightforward acceptance only children possess. "Okay. Do you have books at your house?" "We have lots of books," Jordan assured her. "And a backyard with a swing." Her eyes widened at this promising development. "Can I see?" The journey from that initial meeting to Lily becoming our daughter unfolded over the following months. Each step of the process reinforced what I had learned through my recovery. Family isn't defined by blood, but by choice, by commitment, by love that perseveres through hardship. My mother's trial began and concluded during this same period. She accepted a plea deal to avoid a public proceeding, receiving a 15-year sentence with possibility of parole after 10. I sent a written statement to be read at her sentencing, but did not attend. My focus remained firmly on the family we were building, not the one that had fractured. On a bright summer morning, Jordan, Lily, and I visited the rehabilitation center where our journey together had begun. Lily held my hand as we walked the corridors, greeting staff who had become friends over the years. In the physical therapy room, a young woman in a wheelchair watched with obvious frustration as her therapist demonstrated an exercise. "This is pointless," she muttered as we passed. "Nothing's changing." I paused, recognizing in her expression the same despair I had once felt. "Excuse me," I said. "I don't mean to intrude, but I was a patient here 4 years ago. Complete T10 spinal cord injury." Her eyes widened as she took in my standing position, the cane, my slow but definite gait. "But they told me complete injuries don't." "They told me that too," I smiled. "Sometimes the experts are wrong. Sometimes we write our own endings." Later, driving home with Jordan and Lily, I reflected on how differently my story might have ended had even one element changed. If Bailey hadn't suspected something was wrong. If Mason and Lily Collins hadn't hiked that stormy morning. If Dr. Carter hadn't questioned my previous treatment approach. "What are you thinking about?" Jordan asked, glancing away from the road briefly. "How our worst moments don't define us unless we let them," I replied, watching Lily doze in her car seat. "And how sometimes they become the foundation for our greatest joys." That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, I sat at my desk to finish the epilogue for my book. The final paragraph flowed easily. We often speak of being paralyzed by fear, by trauma, by loss. My body taught me that even physical paralysis isn't always permanent. How much more should we question the paralysis of spirit that keeps us bound to our past? The cliff where my mother left me became the place where I found my strength. The chair she believed would confine me became a tool for my independence. The story she tried to end became, instead, a beginning. Whatever cliff edge you're facing, remember this: the fall doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes it teaches you how to rise. Have you ever faced a betrayal from someone who should have protected you? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found inspiration in my journey, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their story isn't over yet. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, we all have the power to rewrite our endings, no matter how dark the middle chapters may be.